Hello. So it's pretty awesome being in here and with all of you. Hi. I should practice the teacher's trick. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. And now I'm going to do a mic drop. Almost all the time we spend together with 100K10, it's about tapping into the expertise of the network, knowing that extant in the network is so much knowledge, so many lessons learned through the hard work of trying and figuring out what works and what doesn't, and that there's so much to share in that. But we also like, at our summits, to take what my husband sometimes calls the pause that refreshes, but to bring in inspiration from outside of our direct network and our direct community to center us in the big challenges and to inspire us and nourish us as we move forward with our own. And so we have the privilege this afternoon to engage with 3 trailblazers, pioneers who have taken up grand challenges in STEM, in cancer, in climate change, and in health. And who will talk to us about the ways that they have taken up these challenges, each of them from their own perch, to make significant progress against them. And then they'll be joined by 100K10's ally and my friend and mentor, Bojana Conforti, who is herself a biochemist and bench scientist, who went on to spend 15 years communicating about scientists and to the public, and is now leading the Simons Foundation's work on education and outreach. And she will lead us in a robust conversation with these pioneers from whom we can take sustenance as we take up our own moonshot work. We're going to do this in a format that might be familiar to some of you. It's what I like to call the haiku of presentations, and no one really knows how to pronounce it, but it goes something like this.
Pekka Kucha? Pachekacha. Pachekacha. Pachekacha.
It's 20 slides, 20 seconds each. I will keep us moving and learning together. So the 3 of them will use that. And do take a minute to collect your thoughts, because we'll be looking to you for questions and conversation as soon as it ends. We're going to kick it off with Shri Bose. Shri began researching cancer when she was a high school student. She went on to win Google's first science fair and win the grand prize for her work in ovarian cancer. She's a senior at Harvard now and is flying home tomorrow morning first thing to get her very last classes as a college student. She's joined here by her parents, who have every reason to be extremely proud of a very wonderful young woman and person who is committing to take up some of the big moonshots of our time. It's my pleasure to introduce Shri. She'll be followed by 2 others and then a conversation. Thanks so much. Join me in welcoming.
Thank you, Talia. That was a kind introduction. So my name is Shri Bose, and unlike the highly accomplished people who are going to join me on stage, I'm actually still a student. So that means I'm massively underqualified to talk about anything. But I hope I can give you guys a unique perspective by sharing my story and sharing how I got where I am and why I do what I do. So with that, let's get started. At the very beginning, I was a cute child. Things changed. So I grew up loving science. I mean, ever since I was little. I mean, maybe not that little. At that age, I think I only liked plastic boxes. But I remember that I always loved questioning the world around me. But that didn't just happen. I mean, it wasn't just a random coincidence. In fact, I grew up with my very first scientific mentor. My older brother, Pinaki, who's 2 years older than me, was one of my first people who made me excited about science. In fact, some of my earliest memories of falling in love with science was actually him coming home from school and sharing everything he had learned in science class. And he was so excited, and that made me excited. And so I always questioned the world around me and how I could make things better. And that made for some pretty wonky projects growing up. I did my first science project on turning spinach blue so I would be more excited while eating my vegetables. My second science project was actually making a remote-controlled garbage can so I wouldn't have to take out the trash. So, I mean, these were fun projects. They were projects that were centered around me, and they were asking questions that weren't really groundbreaking. They weren't the kinds of questions that could change the world. In fact, I didn't start asking those questions until I turned 15, and my grandfather passed away. And as a 15-year-old, watching my grandfather go from this very organized man who had years and years of Reader Digest magazines organized away in file cabinets to becoming completely bedridden was just heartbreaking. And I remember at the time, I was a freshman in high school. I was sitting in class. I was being told that cancer is caused by DNA damage, and it's just damage messing up DNA, and that's how you get cancer, and that's how patients die. And I remember seeing that, sitting there, and thinking, this just is not enough. This does not make sense. And so I started reading on my own. I Googled everything I could find about cancer. I read complex scientific journals that I had to Google every other word of. But slowly, over time, I started having to Google every fifth word or every sixth word. And slowly, I was learning. And at some point, I realized that the questions I was actually starting to ask were questions that professors were asking. And at that point, I knew I had to ask for help. So I started reaching out to all of the professors I could find emails for. I wrote dozens of emails asking to work in labs, and I got rejected by all of them. And so when I emailed Dr. Alokananda Basu at the University of North Texas Health Science Center, I wasn't really expecting much. I wasn't expecting to get accepted into this lab. And so when she responded to me with, hey, you can come talk to me, I was excited. So on this beautiful spring day in Fort Worth, Texas, my mom actually drove me to a graduate lab, and I shared why I cared so much about cancer, and Dr. Basu gave me my first chance. So during this time, I was 15, I was working in this lab, I messed up a lot. I broke glassware, I messed up experiments that took days to redo, but I learned, and I fell in love with what I was learning. And I ended up doing this really cool project on drug resistance in ovarian cancer, and I actually won the grand prize of the first ever Google Global Science Fair. I tend to make very photogenic faces when I'm excited. And it was an incredible opportunity. And I remember at the time, it didn't feel like an award for the work. It felt like President Obama and all of these other incredible opportunities I was getting was actually an award for the fact that I hadn't given up when I was getting rejected by professors, that I was in lab and I was messing up, but I was loving what I was doing. And that got recognized on a very grand platform. I was in Glamour magazine. I got to do a model shoot. But those things, it felt like they were happening because the world around me could recognize why I cared about what I was doing. Over the past 3 years, I've had the chance to only learn even more from the best people in the entire world at Harvard. I've forged friendships that I'm sure will last a lifetime. But all of these opportunities came about because I never stopped questioning. And I don't think my story is actually all that special. I mean, all kids have questions. We all have ideas at a certain age about things that matter to us and how to make the world better. Even if it's blue spinach or remote-controlled garbage cans, those are ideas. And by encouraging that sort of inquisitive nature in students from a very early age, we can create the next generation of scientists. I think I was really lucky because I had very supportive parents. I had access to all of this technology that let me reach out to professors who I had never met or known about before I started Googling them. And all students have that at this point. So one of the most powerful things we can do is actually to encourage it. Because science isn't done in isolation. It's forged in frustration. It's forged by mentors rejecting you. It's forged in your family, your friends, your teachers picking you up and telling you that science is something you can do, and it's something you should try to do to make your own opportunities and take the first step. And so I started, after the Google Science Fair, I had the chance to speak to a lot of students. And something I kept hearing from all of these students was, I'm interested in science, technology, engineering, math. How do I get started? Now for science, I had an answer sort of ready to go. I had found a mentor, go find a mentor. That's how you do it. But for technology, there wasn't a really good starting point. And so along with the co-founder, we decided to create it. And we created Piper, this electrical engineering kit that sort of brings together playing Minecraft. How many of you guys have heard of Minecraft? All right. And actually building physical hardware. And in that sort of way, we have broken the barriers that were stopping kids from building with technology. But my story is about much more than that. It's about creating my own opportunities. It's about trying to find mentors. It's about creating a network, and it's about trying to create those opportunities for others. It's the most powerful thing I can do as an individual, and I think together as a community, as we are here, this massive, powerful network, I think it's the most powerful thing we can do together to change the world. So with that, thank you so much for having me. And I would like to introduce our next speaker, Walid Abdelhadi, who is the director of the Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences at the University of Colorado Boulder. He was the former chief scientist at NASA, and he's also one of the most humble, kind people I've met. So with that, huge round of applause for Walid.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, all I can say is I'm glad I was a senior in college 30 years ago, because I don't think I could do it now if this is an example of what we've got. So I would like to start with a little story. You can start the slide. About my own experiences in adventure, and it began in the 60s with the Apollo 11 landing. I was fascinated with the space program, and it's great to be here. And my best friend Matt Perry and I, we would drink Tang in his kitchen, right? We were going to be astronauts. We'd grab a football helmet and we'd walk out to his shed, right? And we'd walk out like in slow motion, like we saw on TV, with the helmet under and point and wave. And we would prepare for our journey to the moon in something like this. And we would strap ourselves in and we would do a countdown, right? And we would blast off, and we would bang ourselves against the side of the shed, right? This violent trip through space in our own rocket, Matt Perry's shed. And we'd land on the moon right there in his backyard. Now, it was Matt's house, Matt's Tang, Matt's shed, so he always got to be Neil Armstrong. And he would step out of the shed and close it, and I, Buzz Aldrin, would faithfully follow him. And this is true, kids are terrible. There was a third kid that wanted to play with us, and I won't say his name, and we'd let him be Michael Collins, and we wouldn't let him out of the shed. He had to sit there while we walked and explored, but we'd tell him all about it. But this fascination, right, this fascination with the space program really changed the way I looked at life. And at Apollo 17, I was in second grade, and I said to my teacher, Ms. Swicky, I said, I don't get it. The rocket's moving really fast. The moon's moving really fast. That means you have to launch the rocket someplace the moon isn't, so they get there at the same time. How do they do that? And she's like, oh, math. They use all kinds of math. And I thought, math. I'm going to learn some of that. That sounds awesome. And so I continued my math studies. And in fact, it was a high school math teacher who said to me, I'd love to see you working at NASA someday, which those words just triggered something in me. Wow. Maybe someday I could work at NASA. So I became an engineer, and I worked for a company that made satellites. That was my first foray into the space program. I got to build things that went into space. But as time went on, something took me over. It wasn't the building of these satellites, it was what they were looking at. And another gift from NASA was a view of our planet, changing the way we saw ourselves. And I wanted to be a part of that. Look, that is Earth, suspended in space, alone, everything we know, as Carl Sagan said, right there. So I shifted my direction a little bit, and a lot actually, and went into understanding the Earth, in particular the rapidly changing polar regions. And had the good fortune of going to the Arctic a number of times. It is remote, it's distant, but it's vulnerable, it's frail, it's changing rapidly. Even these powerful creatures are at great risk. And when you see this change up close, or from space, as I did, you're seeing a time sequence, 1980 to 2015, of the disappearing ice cover, you can't help but feel something's going on. Something big, something important, something that requires action. And it isn't just the Arctic where I do my work. I always tell my kids, Dad watches ice melt from space. It's other places, the Amazon rainforest, okay, changing dramatically right before our eyes. Right? There is a human fingerprint on this planet, whether we like it or not, and there are a number of challenges that have to be managed. And so I really became impassioned about this when I saw the changing ice cover. This is the temperature anomaly, the difference from average temperature in 2015. The Earth is much hotter now. We are entering a new state. Now there are pockets of cool, right, and primarily in Antarctica, but on balance, the temperatures have been going up year after year after year. And part of this is because we are a society that needs energy. We need energy to prosper, and the delivery of that energy takes many forms. And we struggle with the balance of efficient, usable, easily accessed energy and the conditions of our climate. Now, this, to me, sure, there's the negative aspect of this, but this is also, you have to remember, a result of progress, turning what's in the Earth into something useful to power our planet. Well, how do we balance that? This is where the challenge is. Now, I've had the opportunity to talk to members of Congress and congressional testimony, the White House, national news networks, school children, at international events, and deliver the message. And really, I've found communicating in a way that expresses shared values is the way to connect to people. And the best way to do that is through information, knowledge, education, the very investments that 100K10 seeks to produce. And when we do that, the future is unimaginable, or I would say imaginable if you're very creative. Harnessing the sun, capturing the energy provided by wind power. The portfolio of energy options available to us is vast, and it takes all of them. I don't want to say none of this, more of that, or all of that, but to power this beautiful planet in a way that keeps it looking this way and functioning this way for our children and grandchildren is one of the greatest challenges of our time. And the way we do that is by increasing awareness, by helping people understand. And I view teachers like water, watering a garden, right? There is so much potential beauty and capability in there. It just needs water. It just needs to be handled properly. And that's the hand-holding that goes on at our schools and the propping up. And I had one math teacher say, I would love to see you work at NASA. I can't help but wonder how many other kids he inspired with just a sentence. And it's a multiplicative effect. If it was 10 kids and they inspired 10 others, and so on, before you know it, you're in the hundreds of thousands. All right? So 100K10 to me is really millions in 20 as far as I think about it. And I want to finish with this slide from the Paris Accord, the United Nations discussing how to address the challenges of climate change. 175 countries signed on to this, made a commitment, and that comes from understanding. It comes from knowledge. It's because teachers taught them this is important, this matters, and it is within your power to do something about it. So I love the hand raising. It's, you know, it's a step, it's not the solution, but the path to victory, the path to achievement, the path to success comes from teachers taking the time to inspire millions. So thank you. With that, I would like to introduce our next speaker. Thank you. This is Maureen Bisignano, and she's a senior fellow and president emerita at the Institute for Health Care Improvement. So thank you.
Thank you, Waleed. And again, I am so excited to be here with you. I bring you a different scientific problem, and that is that some years ago, we determined that over 100,000 patients were being harmed and injured in United States hospitals. And we'll take the slides. And I was really frustrated when we first started to take this problem on because we knew the answers, but we didn't know how to spread the best practices across the country. So we sat there and said, what are we going to do? How are we going to save 100,000 lives? We did what a lot of parents do. We called our kids. Don Berwick and I had children who were running political campaigns. And we said to them, we want to save a lot of people. And they said, some is not a number, soon is not a time. And this is actually a sign now in the Institute for Healthcare Improvement where I work. They said, you've got to pick a deadline and you've got to pick a number. So we said, okay, we want to save 100,000 lives in 18 months. Now, we had a small team of about 8 people. We obviously couldn't do that alone. But we got these 8 people together, all very young, and said, we need you not only with the deadline and the number to build the will for change. So they said, we need a bus. They said, we need a bus because we're going to have to drive across the United States to build the will. And this is us sending them off from Harvard Square in Boston. And they drove across the country and left all these hospitals with 6 ideas for change. They said, if we could get 2,000 or more hospitals to implement 6 changes, we could save these lives. And within 18 months, with the inspiration of these teams, we built a global network, a network first in the United States, of hospitals that would be emailing each other, sharing ideas and examples, sharing data and case studies, inspiring each other. So it started with a goal, building will, sharing ideas, and together in 18 months' time, about 3,000 of the 5,000 hospitals in the United States saved 122,000 lives. We were so inspired that we said, we can build on this reusable network that we built, and we can take on another huge problem. So I partnered with a friend, Roseanne Haggerty, and we said, let's resolve homelessness in the United States. And with Roseanne's vision, we launched a project called 100,000 Homes. We said, shelters are not the answer. We need 100,000 people in a year to be in permanent housing. We put the number, we put the date, we created the ideas, and we went on to build the will. We had the network, and we started traveling to communities, and we had a process that we used. We'd go out at 4 in the morning and create registries of the homeless people. We found empty housing, and we learned how to match up the homeless with the new housing. And what we were doing is not only creating homes, we were creating health. And that was so inspiring to us all. So as we went through this journey, city by city, we found that in truth, we were not only getting 100,000 people into homes, but we were changing lives. We were changing health. And I'm going to show you a brief video that shows what you can do when you build the will for change, when you get people committed, and then you take off on a journey just like the one you're on.
to stand up and take a look around. You look up way to the sky. Yeah. And when your deepest thoughts are broken, keep on dreaming, boy, 'cause when you stop dreaming, it's time to die. And as we all play for till tomorrow, no, some ways we'll walk and other ways we'll play. Yeah. But I know we can't all stay here forever. So I wanna write my words on the face of today, and then I'll paint it. Knows I fade away. They'll all look at me and say, they'll say, hey, look at him, and where he is these days. Life is hard, you have to change.
Thank you. So life is hard, but we have to change. We've got to take on these challenges. So recently we launched the 100 Million Healthier Lives campaign, and we launched Zero 2016, which is to get every veteran into permanent housing in this year. So what I'm suggesting is that you think about deadlines, you think about numbers, bold numbers like you are here. You think about building will for change. This is Becky Canis working on the 100,000 Homes campaign. You can see when we hit 10,000, she had 10,000 tattooed on her arm. But look, she put the comma after the second zero because she was so sure we were going to get to 100,000, and she did get to put that zero afterward. It takes courage. And so recently I went to the Antarctic and did the polar plunge. I leaped into the Antarctic Ocean before it melts, and believe me, it was cold. But what I'm suggesting is pick a number like you are, build the will for change, give people ideas, teach them improvement skills, and jump in. Thank you very much.
Well, those were pretty awesome talks, don't you think? So another round of applause. I'm gonna ask you all to think about your questions, but first I'm going to open it up to the panel and ask them about what common themes they heard throughout the talks. Who wants to start?
I'll start. Passion and shared commitment, whether it's shared with a mentor or shared with an organization. And that commitment not just to solutions, but to telling the stories that will lead to those solutions.
And I'll add that when I first became a CEO, I was very young, and I used to think that I would hire people for IQ, that I hired the smartest people. And then I realized in healthcare, I needed to hire high EQ, emotional quotient, or empathy. And now I hire for CQ, curiosity quotient. And I think these two people here demonstrate high, well, all of them, but high CQ like I've never seen.
I mean, I think as a young person, it's just inspirational to me to be on the stage with both of you. But I think what struck me is really you are both working with things that matter on a really global scale, but also things that deeply matter to you. And I think that shines through in both communicating what you work on, but also in terms of the incredible work that you've been able to do. So picking issues that really matter, I think is a powerful thing that I'm definitely taking away.
So how do you go from the idea to getting the individuals that you need around the table to get started?
Well, I think building a network is critical. I mean, you could see the maps, and obviously you can't get 100,000 lives saved without touching many, many people. And so we just built a network by saying, does anybody want to join? And we made it very attractive to join. It was free, it was important, It was going to save lives. It was scientifically evidenced. And when you put all those pieces together, it's really hard to walk away and say, I came into healthcare to save people, and I'm not going to join. And I think that kind of a network, and then lots of communication, which especially the young in the room are really good at. Tempo of communication matters.
So how did you keep going when things got really tough?
Well, I'll tell you, one thing that's always helped me is we're talking about innovation and inspiration, and people get tired. And so I, some years ago, found a different concept, which is exnovation. Is that familiar to you? Exnovation is the process by which you get rid of all the junk in your life. And if you don't do that, you will have no energy. You'll run out of energy for innovation. So it's the meetings that don't matter. It's the tasks and the things that you don't, it's the closets full with stuff. It's the things in your life that don't matter. And if you get really good at exnovation, you will have endless energy to innovate.
So same question to you, Waleed. How do you keep people motivated when it gets really tough? And it gets tough at many points along the way.
Yeah, you know, my area is something in which, you know, with climate change, people have a predisposition often one way or another. And my interest and approach is not to club you over the head with what I think, but to get you to examine the information that's available to you. So in the case of climate change skeptics, I want to talk, I want to engage, I want to understand and help them understand my view. In the case of enthusiasts, we'll say, I actually play the other role. I'm like, look, we have a world that needs energy. Is it really ethical to deprive developing nations of the very things that made us strong? And I think turning it into an intellectual debate, discussion, that goes to the things, the values we all share in common is so important. And you know, there was one senator I spoke to in particular who was very skeptical, and by the end of our conversation, he said, you know, you're not as out there as I expected you to be when you walked into the room. And, you know, what do you say, thank you? But what he was saying was, I appreciate that you came to me with a sensitivity to the things that are important to me and a respect for my view. And it's that, let's look at this from all dimensions, that really I think is so critical.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the idea of pitching to the right audience. I know when I was actually reaching out to professors as a 15-year-old, all of my emails started with the line, hi, my name is Sri Bose, I'm 15-year-old and I want to do cancer research. And I think most professors did not read past that point. That was it. They were like, why? So I got responses that ranged from no, you're too young, to no, please never contact me again. And that was just, it was a repeated string of rejections. And I remember at some point, I almost tuned it out. It was like each rejection was just like a knee-jerk reaction to email the next person, to move on to the next chance, the next opportunity. And that kind of made all the difference in the world. I was actually proposing a project in my emails. And the reason Dr. Basu, who ended up becoming my mentor, responded to me was because she read this proposal, and when I went in and spoke to her, the first thing she said was, you know, your proposal made no sense. It's nonsense, but I like the way you thought through it. And because of that, I want you to work in my lab. And so it's about finding the right network of people who will help you, who see the value in what you're trying to do. Yeah. But I think it's only fitting, especially in science, as bench scientists, you are constantly faced with failure and things not working and things breaking. And so I think it was only fitting that my first experience in science was just this string of rejections. And I think it taught me some very important lessons. Yeah. So.
You know, I would add that one of the important lessons I learned from a mentor is Dr. Joseph Duran told me, you need to be bilingual. And so if I'm having a challenge with building the will, I'll often either bring a patient or a homeless person onto the stage and really interview them and find deeply what that person's life is like. And then you can extrapolate to how many other people are like that. And what are the financial and the social and the human dimensions that we're trying to fix here. But that one story extrapolated to the all, with all of the other implications, is a very, very powerful thing. One of those men in the video got to go to the White House and present to President Obama, one of the homeless guys, and what a tribute that was. That energized people now for the next decade to see him go there.
All right, let's open it up to questions. I know you must have them. There are 2 people running around with mics, so if you could just raise your hand and questions. There's a question right over there. Oh, sorry.
I want to ask Boyana, as a funder, what do you use to identify innovation and people that can create change?
Well, that's not an easy question to answer. I look for a willingness to make mistakes, to learn from those mistakes, to share those mistakes with others, and to bring in unusual partners. So not the typical partners that typically work together, but to actually get ideas from different industries, different experts. That really resonates with me in particular, because then they each bring a particular perspective. They each have their own stories. And I think it builds a unity that otherwise wouldn't exist. So that's one thing I look for. We had another question here.
I just had a question about the homeless project that happened. What measures were considered so that people didn't become homeless again? And also, since you're in healthcare, was there any consideration to improving healthcare for the people who were housed?
So we are tracking homeless recidivism, and the rates are very tiny. Once people are settled and supported, they tend to stay vibrant in their permanent home. And we're measuring health. When we first started to look at some of these people, if you looked at the number of ED visits, the number of emergency rides, the number of police visits, the number of WIC stamps, when you put all those other different disparate social groups together around one person, and nobody knew all of it, you could buy everybody a house. But we needed to connect the pieces, and that was around that person. So I think we're seeing great benefits socially and from a health perspective. Thank you for that.
Other questions? Here's one.
I have a.
Okay.
No, after
Sorry.
the Q&A.
Okay. My name is Rachel Carr. I'm a high school science teacher. So my question is for Waleed. Did you go back and talk to the teacher or let them know that you made it to NASA?
So I worked at NASA for 12 years, then went to the University of Colorado, and then the NASA administrator asked if I would serve as his chief scientist, so I went back. So this is, it's science advisor to the NASA administrator and working with the White House, the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, so it was quite an honor. And the great thing was I got interviewed by my hometown newspaper, and I told that little story about, you know, how those words just stuck with me and turned a switch in me. And a number of people I went to school with wrote to me and said that was really cool to recognize Mr. Whitehouse, if this video is on the web, thank you, and Ms. Swicky from second grade. So I never reached out to him directly, but he still lives in that area, and my hope is that it somehow got to him, but I would like to. And I have to say, this morning when the teachers in the room stood up, I got really choked up. I was surprised at how choked up I got. And I'm like, why am I feeling this way? And I realized, you know, the words that, or the times I was disciplined, or, you know, the encouragement I got, the boundaries that someone put on me because they cared. I owe everything to that. And I'm choked up again. But
It was very inspiring, and I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about what goes on in the background. Like, for example, in the different projects you talked, there was always like, you had 6 things that the hospitals could do. You had certain strategies of getting people off the street and in permanent housing and not falling back. And it feels like there's a lot of work that you do that is very scientific, very engineering-like. Can you talk a little bit about bringing that to the surface? I think that's a fascinating part of the story that got, unfortunately, a bit hidden.
My 20 seconds. My 20 seconds didn't allow that part. So when we at IHI keep a long list of intractable problems on a whiteboard, and every 90 days we pick 5 to 7 of them and assign a team to go to work on developing the science behind them. And we have a big room that's called the sandbox, and we put you in the sandbox, researchers, doctors, nurses, and they've got 90 days to produce a solution. Now, sometimes the solutions take a little bit longer than that. They might take 2 cycles, but people ask me why I give them 90 days. If I gave them 90 months, that would take 90 months. So I just put them in there and say, go to it. And they do a lot of literature searches. They go out to other industries, as you were saying. They extract lessons, but their job is to get it down to what we call a change package. It's a simple set of 5 or 6 things that anybody with energy could do. And it's that change package, build the will, change package, improvement skills. So that's kind of a little window behind the scenes. If any of you are ever in Boston, send me an email and you can come visit and play in the sandbox.
There were some questions over here.
My name is Angela Bergman, and I'm a classroom teacher. For all of your work, you all had to have tenacity and resilience. What is it that classroom teachers can do to help inspire that tenacity and that resilience in our students?
I think, yeah, absolutely. So I actually had a string of really, really great science teachers, and I owe a lot of going into science to them. I think one of the most powerful things that a science teacher ever did for me was actually to tell me that they had no idea what I was talking about. I went in, I was asking these questions about cancer to my freshman year biology teacher, and I remember her literally just saying, you know, I actually don't know that much about that, but how about you go read up and then come back and talk with me? And just the fact that she gave me that time to even go out, read on my own, like really develop my own ideas and come back and speak to her, that made all the difference in the world. That made me feel like I was qualified enough to reach out to these professors. And I think I was really lucky to be very young, because when you're very young, you don't yet know what you're not supposed to do. And so I think I was really lucky in that regard. And because I had this teacher who was willing to encourage me to go out and actually figure out things that I wasn't allowed to do, that was what sparked a really early love for science and for research. But yeah, I was very lucky, and I think it's a powerful thing that all teachers can do to admit when we don't know something and actually encourage students to push our knowledge as well.
And different things, I think, resonate with different students. And for me, it was, what I would say is when you see the potential in a person, acknowledge that. Say, I would love to see you work at NASA someday. Or, you know, just say any words that say you've got unlimited potential. And when you see someone not realizing or living up to that potential, call them on it. I had a few teachers, one who told me it's time I grew up and that life wasn't as easy as I found my classes to be. And, you know, that sat with me. I think his words were, it's time you got your thumb out and started working a little harder. And I was like, but wait, I get A's. He's like, I don't care. You can work harder, and you're going to need to if you want to go to the places you want to go.
And I would just add one thing. I am a big believer, as they both said, in trusting the young. I was entrusted with the job of being a CEO of a hospital at 34. And I love what you were saying, because you really don't know what you don't know, so you just forge forward. But at least if teachers are anything like people who are working in healthcare, the other thing I would add is take care of yourself. Because if you're vibrant and alive and functional, you can give that to the students. And if you're burned out, you give that to them as well. And for physicians and nurses, I'm saying live a life of gratitude and you will get it back. You know, I think you should all send a postcard to somebody from NASA that says, I'm here, but I'm missing you anyway. And when someone opens their mailbox and sees that, it's going to come back to you. But take care of yourselves physically, emotionally. It's so important, because that's what you'll give.
So can I add one thing? Yeah. I'm not recommending this for the teachers of younger students, but something that had a profound impact in my life. When I was in college, I took a class in human sexuality. And it was great, because the teacher, 400 students in the class, it was a human sexuality class in college, right? And he had everybody at the start of the semester write a question on an index card about something about sex that they didn't understand but were embarrassed to ask in front of their colleagues. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. And he would answer 3, so they were all anonymous. And one of the questions, I'll never forget this, was, how do you know you're in love? And you remember in college, but I love her, right? You're pathetic. He said, if it energizes you, it's right. You're in love. If it drains you, it's wrong. And I took that through my work. The first job I ever had where I thought, I woke up in the morning wanting to go in. It's like, this is what he was talking about. I love what in the literal sense, I love what I do. So if you can instill that idea about, if something energizes you, dive in with both feet, and you'll have the energy, the tenacity, the perseverance to do it. If it just drains you, if you're like, math, I gotta do math, okay, it's probably not for you.
My name is Kareem. So I think in listening to your cancer story, it's certainly very inspiring, but for me, I also hear like, you were so close to falling through the cracks, right? It was that one professor. And it seems like now in our culture, we romanticize individual entrepreneurs, and yet we're standing in a room that owes its existence to like a national effort to push back against the Soviets. And so I'm curious, in your work, how do you guys reconcile or think about kind of individual go-gettedness versus like large-scale efforts, and ultimately, who do you think, in solving these large social issues, who do you think is ultimately responsible for incubating that talent?
I would say that I've been doing a lot of research into that question, because it's the first time in history that I can find that we have 5 distinct generations in the workforce. We have incredible diversity of race and ethnicity and backgrounds, and rich and poor in the same workforce, and we have different professions coming to work together, and yet we don't teach teamwork. And to me, it's all about teamwork. It's about humility in leadership and the ability to recognize every person's assets and put those together in a way that pushes the group farther forward.
I would just add that it's teamwork in small teams, and it's teamwork on large teams, and sometimes we're not aware that the teams we're on, and that's on the leaders to say, look, you contribute in this way, you contribute in this way. And my organization is 800 people involved in environmental research, about 200 of which are students. And I make it a point to say, I work for you. You don't work for me. My job is to make sure that you can do your job. You have the tools and capacity so that collectively we can make meaningful progress on that thing we all care about, whether you're a scientific researcher at a bench or whether you're in the accounting office. It's all a contribution, whether it's a 2-person team or a 10,000-person team like here at Johnson Space Center. It's knowing your place in the team and everybody understanding how they're contributing to moving something we all care about forward.
Any other questions? Oh.
Thank you. I was wondering if you guys could each talk a little bit about a time where you maybe lost your grounding or lost your footing in the work that you were doing and what you did to get back on track.
I'll go first.
For me, there are so many examples to draw from. Where do I start? So I was a graduate student at Stanford in my first year there. And I did some experiments, and they actually worked. And I thought, well, this can't be right. So I did them again, and they worked. But it turned out that the results I was getting were very much against the dogma, the current dogma, the way things. So I just assumed I had done something wrong. And but then once I convinced myself that I had not, I went out to a meeting, and it was so difficult to stand there as a graduate student to various different professors and say, I think the way you've interpreted these results is not quite right. And so I spent the next 6 years, working to show that that was in fact the case. And it was an extraordinary education. I wanted to give up many times along the way because it was such a huge uphill battle. And so I think just feeling really passionate and energized and knowing that really what I wanted to do was find out what the answer was. I mean, it wasn't that important. Some part of me really wanted to be right, of course, but I really did want to understand and get to the truth. And so that kept me going. But it was an uphill battle.
I guess mine was similar in that, as I mentioned, I became CEO of a hospital at 34, and I was part of a national healthcare system. So there were about 100 other CEOs, and they were all experienced men, I would say. So I would walk into the room, and they would always say, it was a Southern company, honey, go get me coffee, and I had to learn how to put my feet on the ground, and I had to find my way, and I decided to do it with humor, and I'd say, okay, I'll get it this time, and you're getting it for me this afternoon, and I would get that promise fulfilled. But it was, I think finding yourself in a challenging circumstance, I think humor often does help as opposed to anger. And just taking one step at a time, putting yourself forward the next day and the next day, that kind of resilience and endurance is something that I found helped me along the journey.
Well, and for me, I kind of alluded to it about the energy. So I graduated, I became an engineer, and I was a bad engineer. I'd get to work a little late, I'd go to lunch a little early, I'd come back late, and I'd leave early, and I was floundering, and I couldn't put it together. It was like I did well in school, right? All I needed was to be told what I needed to know, and I could go off and learn it and do it. And now I'm an engineer, and I'm just supposed to do these projects. I'm supposed to come up with ideas on my own. What's that about? And I really struggled. And I realized, I went back to this, if it energizes you, it's right. If it drains you, it's wrong. Advice that I got, and I realized this drains me. I'm not looking forward to getting to work. I'm not looking forward to making it through and figuring out the next thing. And once I settled into what that was, I haven't looked back. I've even in the difficult times, I've had the energy to plow through because I care about it. I care enough. It fits me well to put the energy in and even get through the challenging times.
I think my story is actually kind of similar. So I've been doing science fairs since I was a pretty little kid. I did these projects with like blue spinach and remote controlled garbage cans. And the first summer I actually worked in the lab, I did this really cool project on drug resistance in breast cancer. It was a project that I was kind of assigned, and my professor was like, run with it and see what happens. And so at the end of the summer, I had this really great project. I was going to take it back to this science fair that I had been competing in since I was a little kid. And I mean, it's a project on breast cancer. It's better than blue spinach, right? So I was convinced that I was probably going to win something at least. And I remember I walked out of the award ceremony with absolutely nothing. And I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, I thought I loved doing research, and it turns out that I suck at it. And I was convinced that I was never going back to the lab. I was going to turn my attention towards like weepy poetry and just moping, and I was sure of it. And I remember about 3 months after that, I was still convinced I wasn't going back, but I was sitting back in biology class, and I remember looking at the screen and thinking, this is still just not enough. And I started cancer research because I wanted to help people like my grandfather, and I knew in that instant that I cared too much to quit. And so it was really a moment of just realizing that this was something I loved, and even if I sucked at it, I was going to go back and get better and not suck as much, and then hopefully I would be able to do work that actually was meaningful and could fulfill my original goals.
All right, thank you all so much. And let me thank the 3 speakers again. It was really inspiring.
So I feel like, what did we hear amidst all of this? Connect to what energizes you and find your passion. From the very first moments of 100K10, we talked about the big work that needed to happen. It always ended at what would you be passionate about leading? We all have very full plates and go back to very full schedules and not enough time and not enough money. If you're going to take up this work, it has to be work that energizes you, that you are passionate about. Find mentors and networks. Science is not forged in isolation. We need to do this work together. We will not do it alone. Build the will, both inside and outside your organizations. There's an amazing story about NASA that my husband told me, probably apocryphal, that in the mid-60s, a man walks in and stops someone, says, excuse me, what do you do here? And the man says, me, I put a man on the moon. And he was the janitor. But everyone is connected to the mission. So build that sense of connection to the mission and will in your organizations and in your work. And then, so deep out of the work of IHI to learn and test. And what an amazing whiteboard that must be. All of our biggest, seemingly intractable problems, and then a sandbox to go solve them. What would that look like if we did that in our organizations, and if 100K10 could be a place where that would happen? What an amazing aspiration for our work. So with this, and buoyed by these really inspiring people and their work and taking up grand challenges, we're going to, having finished lunch, we're going to go have recess. And one of the things we heard from you all over the course of our summits is that we host them in these amazing places, so deep and rich in STEM, and there's never enough time to play in them. So we built in time for play. When you go back, which we'll be doing right after the session, you can take a tour, you can do a scavenger hunt that was organized by the Johnson Space Center Houston. There are up to 4 winners of the scavenger hunt with $25 gift certificates to the gift store, where you can buy as much astronaut ice cream as you want. There is also astronaut ice cream in Apollo, where you can also do some speed networking for those of us who are more on the introvert side and find these rooms draining. There are places there to help you to find people you want to meet, and a recording booth to help to tell your stories about how you've experienced these root causes and these grand challenges in your work, where you've seen bright spots or participated in creating solutions, and ways that you have benefited or learned or struggled around this work, so we can capture those stories and let them propel us forward. There's also a time right now to propose sessions for the unconference, which we'll have tomorrow morning, when all of you can propose sessions that are the work that you want to take up, stories you want to share with colleagues. So that's between now and 3:15 when the next sessions begin. And that will be our first chance to work together on the grand challenges. You'll be in a room. On your name card, you'll have a number that corresponds to a room and to a challenge area that you've chosen, along with the particular root cause that you've chosen. With that, we begin to pivot from the work that we're already doing and the expertise that we already share in the network to taking up together these root causes, beginning to chip away and make progress towards solving the grand challenges. You'll be in rooms with people most passionate about these causes with you, most committed to taking the next steps necessary to working on them. And then we'll have a chance to celebrate in Independence Hall. NASA invited astronauts to come and join us. And what they said to me yesterday is that they've never had so many astronauts raise their hands and want to come. We'll be joined by 5 folks who have been in space, who will be with us tonight. And they said they did this because all of the astronauts that she's ever worked with, including her own husband, have felt that they were only there because of teachers. And she said her husband spent 6 months in the International Space Station, and while he was there, he called every single teacher who was still alive who had helped him get where he was. So have a great time, enjoy recess, continue to learn and have fun, and we'll see you in those sessions and in Independence Hall to play and party and eat some great food. Looking forward to all of it.